You are live.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Board of Education Policy Committee meeting. Today is Wednesday, September 17th. The time is now 5:01 p.m. And with me this evening, I have board members Mary Ellen Flaherty Ludwig and Janine Randolph. And I also have Ralph Valenzizi with us this evening, who will be directing the meeting this evening and information on our cell phone. So you're on.
All right. Sounds good. Great. Thank you, Chairman Carpio, and good evening, board. Good to see everybody again after last night. But I am really excited to kind of talk about some of the work that we've done in this last year. So I do want to the way that I want to approach this is the same way that we've approached the last couple of meetings. Tonight, our focus is really around the cell phone regulation. We actually have a policy for personal devices, so we want to be able to describe exactly what it is that we need to do with that policy and how it actually gets regulated in our schools and in our community. Um, so I will kind of go through a real quick summary. Um, of some of the things that came out of the work that we've done. And then what I'd like to do is show you an example of the last cell phone regulation that we talked about that's redlined and what was actually changed so that then we can look at the final one. So that was kind of the way that I figured it'd be easy enough to kind of walk through step by step so we can see the changes to the regulation and then have a conversation around anything else. But with that, let me kind of get my um, presentation up. Sorry about that. Trying a different screen. Can you guys see my presentation at the moment?
Yes.
Okay, great, thanks. So tonight, really what I wanted to talk about was some of the survey results. And before we get to the survey results of what our parents shared with us about the cell phone policy, I want to kind of say how, kind of just walk through historically how we got to where we are. About a year ago, we started talking about what our cell phone policy would look like here in Norwalk. And we wanted to make sure, just like as we have in many other ways, that we include all our stakeholders. In this case, we really wanted to get student voice involved with this. So earlier this year, we included our student council to reach out to our students in our high schools to be able to give us some feedback. And one of their projects was actually to help craft what the cell phone regulation would look like. From that, they spent a bit of time talking to their peers, coming up with recommendations through research. And back in the spring, they presented a draft regulation to us and had a conversation around the concerns that they also have around cell phone use in schools. Um, from that, we then knew that we wanted to talk to our other big stakeholders, which are our staff. So we took that regulation that students helped draft, created a survey for staff, and we had hundreds of staff members respond, which was wonderful, with some changes to that regulation. We actually made a lot of those adjustments, and I'll explain a little bit about what some of those adjustments are because they really mimic the last step, which was actually having parents respond to the survey and then making some edits as well. So you'll see what those edits look like now. But I think there was a common thread that we saw between staff and with parents on exactly how we wanted to kind of approach this. And that's what I'll talk about in just a moment. But I did I did want to just kind of just frame it this way so we kind of know that this is, it's been really a year-long process. And I know that there's going to be even more feedback over the next, couple of months as we kind of put this in place. The regulation is really just that. The nice thing about having this as a regulation is it does allow us to kind of tweak little things that we're going to come up with. I mean, we've had already some questions coming up. I know that I'm excited that I saw, one of the people watching tonight is Bob Casienda, who helps to support our Center for Youth Leadership at Brian McMahon. And those students actually have some really, really good ideas, and they were really, really helpful in other policies that we've done in the past. And I know that they're going to be giving us some feedback after this presentation too, as well. So we welcome that, and we're really, really excited that everybody's kind of getting involved, and we're trying to do this. I know that we've talked about in the past of like how we want to be open and we want to make sure that we get everybody's feedback into this. I think with this policy, once again, we've done a really, really good job of that. I'm really, really proud of it. So with that, what I wanted to do is let me get right into presentation. So from the teacher survey, we made a number of edits, and a lot of it you'll see in just a second because once again, it mimics exactly what the parents were asking for. But just as an overview, we waited to the end of the summer, if you remember, to be able to do the parent survey because we figured that parents wouldn't potentially see it over the summer. So as soon as school came back, about 2.5 weeks ago, we released the survey and left it out there for about a couple of weeks for parents to fill in. We got, and I've got to actually update that. The final amount was a little over 1,200 responses from parents. So that last day that I was pulling this together, it actually grew a little bit. But when it was 11:52, we had about 978 responses in English and 174 in Spanish. So we actually got a good amount of parents that were actually responding on both ends with very, very similar um, concerns and comments on the policy. We had it broken up into two different areas. One was for K-8 and one was for 9-12. The feedback that I kind of summarized here for the K-8 regulations. And Diane, I may need some help with. I tried to pull in some of the quotes that I saw were kind of resonant of from some of the Spanish ones, but you probably can help me a little bit with these two as well. But overarchingly, from both sets of surveys, we found out that the common themes were strong parent support for restrictions. They definitely want to have restrictions in place. There were concerns about emergency access. Okay, so that was one question that kind of came up. Um, they had suggestions for teacher collection and return and how that would look like. We ended up going down the path that you'll see in just a moment that really they're away. So it's from bell to bell. So that shouldn't have anything to do for the idea of how teachers can need to collect them. But that was something that kept coming up in the way that the parents were looking at this. And they also emphasized, which I thought was really interesting, parents' accountability at home. So the parents were really bringing up, part of it is, and that's that last quote that you'll see here in Spanish. Diane, you'll be able to help me with this, but I thought that this kind of resonated from some of the things that we saw parents saying. From the K-8 standpoint, parents were like, there's no reason to really, they really felt strongly that not having the phones during the school day was a good thing. I mean, that was a very, very resounding feedback in general.
Mhm.
There was the second one, which I believe talked a little bit about parents, the teachers being able to
Yeah,
take phones. They
the
felt
teacher should be responsible for taking away the phones.
yeah, that was something that kept coming up, especially in our Spanish ones. But once again, I think we've actually taken it one step further, meaning that, we feel like the teachers really just need that consistency to know that they can what needs to be in place. And that last one really was something where it kind of resonated with me too, that they were kind of saying it's like the it's not just an issue of the schools. It's really an issue of the community and the parents too. We all need to be involved. So
Right.
we're going to try to make sure that we kind of continue doing that work. So these these were just a couple of things that resonated from me, as a quick summary of those surveys. And I've got to say, I don't want to get into our some of the other areas of tech that we've been working on, but this is one of those times where AI was really, really helpful in helping to summarize large amounts of text so that we can actually come up with, answers for this for 1,200 surveys. The 912 regulations, though, there were some mixed views a little bit. So,
Ralph, Ralph,
yes.
just could Diane, could you translate those last two so I
Yeah.
could really follow what you meant?
The first one is that the teacher takes away the phones.
Okay,
And
that one I sort of see. Mhm.
the second one is what Ralph said, that it's not just a school problem, but it is a public and parents' responsibility also.
Okay, thanks for the translation.
Great. So at the 912 level, there was kind of like a little bit of a mix. Some parents supported limited use, but most wanted the same situation as K-8, meaning very, very strict rules, bell to bell. Um, they see phones as being as harming study time and social interaction. Because at one point in you'll see that we made some changes. One of the things in the regulation that we talked about was being able to have them during passing times. And parents, that's one thing that was resounded quite a bit. They said there's no reason to have them during passing times. Let's let kids talk to each other, especially at lunchtime too as well. And there was still a little bit of a concern about having them for access for safety, but they do prefer, in general, that there's got to be the limitations in place, and that kind of like resounded more so than worrying about, having access to them. And that kind of goes back to this idea of what we call those yonder pouches, and I'll talk about those in just a minute. Um, but the question around those yonder pouches and stuff, and they would actually have been, in many cases, those would be locked up in an emergency access. You wouldn't be able to get to them unless someone was able to unlock those phones. So,
Ralph,
yes.
when you had the mixed views, some support and most want, like what's the kind of ratio there?
I'd have to go back and actually take a look a little bit more carefully.
Okay.
These were huge narrative pieces, but as I was kind of scrolling and going through all of this, um, I would say probably well over half wanted the stricter K-8.
Mm.
Uh,
Okay.
yeah, it was definitely much more of that. There was some parents though, it was kind of trickled in and out that, that there could be some limited use. They didn't see that, but they did feel like there was still all of them felt like there needed to be restrictions,
Right.
especially during class time. The bigger piece was should you have them during passing time and during lunchtime as well.
Right.
Okay. And it was definitely leaning towards the idea of like, no, not at all. So, um, and there's some examples of quotes that, we saw a lot of the similar types of things. 912 regulation should be the same as kindergarten through eighth grade. Just keep it very standardized. Many parents felt there's no reason it's not appropriate to have them during the school day. There's no reason for students to have them. And they did feel like though it was reasonable for them to be able to just use them before and after school because there was a lot of parents that said we need, parent students need them for whether it's access to them to get a ride or if they're at after school of events and so forth. So they did want to make sure that they could still obviously have them, but just not during the day. Just a couple of things around the general feedback. Um, There was, a number of comments that talked about mental health and constant connectivity and how important it is to, for them to disconnect during the day. And we've talked a lot about that. We've discussed, and some of our schools have even had book studies around the anxious generation to talk about, where we want to kind of go with our students. They're just in general less phone use during school, and I mean at this point we're really looking at that ban from bell to bell. There was a lot there was a lot of discussion around this idea of digital citizenship and wellness, because we do have those pieces, especially at the K-8 level. Um, that they wanted to know more, that we're doing more, not just putting a restriction in place, but what are we doing to help with the process? And there was still that piece that phones should be available in emergencies. And once again, I'll get back to the yonder pouch piece about that and the recommendation there for this. So some of the quotes, less is more, don't see the negative impacts of always being connected. That was kind of one thing that we see in ourselves, and how we kind of try to regulate ourselves. It's hard for students to be able to regulate that themselves that way. Um, a lot around restrictions. Take a harder line to protect our children right now. And there was once again the big piece of the resounding piece about having them is in case of an emergency. Parents still felt like they really wanted to be able to have that in place. So a lot of the results from this were that we removed the number of pieces, and I'll show you what those red lines look like, and we reworded certain areas. In a nutshell, though, the regulation doesn't need to be broken up as the original one was by K8 and 912. It really can be one. And so that was one of the bigger pieces that you'll see in the changes. And there's removal of certain language throughout the regulation that creates a more consistent message that allows all teachers to be able to follow the same process. And from a teacher standpoint, when we did the teachers piece, we had given them said, do you want to have options in how you manage it in your classroom? They were resoundingly saying, no, just we want to have one way of managing this so that we can keep it consistent and then they can actually enforce that too as well. So I think that this regulation really reflects that in that format. Um, Before we go on, though, I want to say that, in the process of doing this, and earlier even today, I had some chances to talk to other districts around the United States. Part of being part of Digital Promise and the VILS program is we do meet on a regular basis as leaders to talk about, how is digital citizenship and these processes going in other places. And, just earlier, I was talking to a district in Detroit and a district in Florida. And the district in Detroit, the school system, the schools in Detroit were implementing yonder pouches this year. And the school district in Florida had implemented them last year. Now, it was interesting to talk about, well, how did things work out with these? The school system in Florida actually said we actually got rid of them this year for a number of different reasons. Um, from a cost standpoint, they didn't last more than a year. They were pretty much destroyed over time. So really, they were kind of cost prohibitive to keep replacing them. They were also, though, creating an issue for the teachers because in order to manage that type of a program, someone's got to lock them up in the morning. And really, that became almost like a teacher duty. And even though they were paying the teachers to be able to do that, it really was becoming more of a hindrance. On top of it, something that even the Detroit district had said is that students that were going to be getting around this were still getting around it. They were just putting another phone in there, and so then they still had the same types of issues. So in a lot of ways, that defeats the purpose of having the under pouches. And due to the fact that everybody said in case of an emergency, if there was an emergency and you did need to have students get to their phones, if they are in these pouches, they're locked. So, for many reasons, it makes sense to have the policies. It makes sense to put the restrictions in place and do the enforcement of this. But I don't know if it really does make sense at all to have this additional baggage, no pun intended, the bag, to be able to kind of manage that piece. It may become actually more of a detriment for us to be able to do. So that's kind of where we stand with those right now. So we did a little bit more research around that and how we could actually manage it. But like I said, it wasn't something that came up in many of the surveys themselves about the idea of having them completely locked up. They just want them away from bell to bell. So some of the key takeaways. We really want to make sure that there's broad support. We know that there's broad support for restricting phones in classrooms. That came from both any of the adults that are working with students and even the students themselves, I think, felt that there should be some restrictions in place too, as well as they crafted this. Safety access is essential. That is something that kept coming up. Consistency across the grades was critical. They wanted to make sure that whatever was happening one place was happening in other places. And parents did want to have not just the restriction, but help teach our kids. And I know that we have that a bit at the K-8 level, and we're going to expand on that along with some lessons around AI. So we want to make sure that that's available to them. And that will be, like I said, using staff like our library media specialists to be able to help kind of make that an assured experience for our students. And then we want to balance between learning protection and emergency access. So I think that's one of the other pieces that kind of came out was that they they want there was this feeling that it was resounding that they it kept coming back to this idea that they want them to have the ability to get to them if they need to, but they also want to make sure that they're actually put away for most of the day. I don't know, any questions so far on this?
I don't have a question, but I do have a concern because, like you said, that kids will find a way to use their phone. That if we don't have them set aside somewhere, even if it's not locked, right?
Yeah.
Like a wall board or something where they just put their phones in, where in case of emergency they can just run and grab them. I don't know if allowing them to hold them on their person would help this, the regulation, because they're going to look at them no matter what, I think, if they have them on their person. But if there's a section in the classroom where they can just put it in a pocket without
Yes.
a lock, and it won't cost us thousands or of dollars to be able to do that in the classrooms.
Yeah, and so when we get to the classroom expectations piece, that's the one thing that I left in the red line piece that you'll see. But it is something that we may want to go back and actually address a little more. We do want it to be consistent in the buildings. So I think some teachers have actually used those pouches. Some teachers have made sure that they're not out. But the consistency really ties to that, like what the policy states that they can't be visible, they can't be used, they can't be they. So that's really one of the key pieces. And I think if we wanted to, we can definitely go back to find out whether or not we want to make it as standardized as saying everybody has the shoe pouch, in your room that becomes the manner. One of the things I can say with our schools, though, we did send this out to our building leaders to kind of take a preview of it. Um, the teachers, when we kind of crafted and made these changes to the regulation, they kept referring back to a lot of them did because Brian McMahon actually just basically implemented exactly what we're talking about, just keeping it kind of bell to bell, managing it. And it seems like they've even seen, from what I understand at the school, a very, very big change already from the beginning of this year. That they feel like there's definitely comfort level. Students are, it's been an easy. I don't want to say it's easy to enforce, but it's been easy enough to be able to enforce because they can say the same thing consistently. Um, but I would be happy, Chairman Carpio, to kind of like maybe put out a little bit more about, specifically, how do we actually look at what that would look like specifically in a high school in comparison to the K-8. At the K-8 level, they're literally put away. They're not out. So, it's not like they've got them from passing from class to class. So I think, for the most part, they're in their lockers is where they are. So for the day at the middle schools. And at the elementary schools, they would be in their cubbies or wherever we have that space. It would be the high schools. But I will go back.
Ralph,
Yeah.
just to expand that, I'm so interested in what the high school students recommended in terms of that kind of restriction.
Yeah. So for the most part, with the conversations with the high school students and stuff, they felt as though being able to put them away somewhere where it's not like on them while they're in class was a resounding amount that we heard from them.
So just pressing a little bit more away, meaning in their book bag or that kind of, because how far away?
Yeah. In their book bag, not like actually out on their desk, not visible, not
Right.
so that's what the policy actually will show in just a second.
And
Or the
just
regulation.
just I've been curious about this and I just haven't bubbled up with a question before, but um has is there just a general understanding that all notifications would be off? Because if you're in a classroom, ding, 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 like that. Um, that's a question.
Mhm. That is a good that is a good question. And I believe that I don't remember if it's there, but we that it's silenced as well as
Right, right.
so and if that's not there, that's actually something that's easy enough to correct.
Mhm. Thank you.
The students originally wanted their phones during passing times, though, correct?
They did.
Passing times in like study halls.
That's the one change that actually probably is the biggest change from where the students were. There wasn't the issue of not having them during classes. It was really the issues of passing time and lunch. You
Yeah,
know, that's something that once again, it was pretty apparent from the teachers and from the parents that that was something that they felt pretty strongly about that didn't need to be there. And it was only at high school. It wasn't even, in the middle schools. So
right.
yeah.
Mhm. Thank you.
Sure. So, one of the things that I'm gonna pull up the red line version right now for you to kind of take a look at and we'll kind of walk through it. But if there's as we go through this, I know that some of the people that I had a really, really quick conversation with our NFT president, knowing that she'll be involved and we getting some feedback on what we think and then if there's any other specifics that we need to look at too as well because I think that the teachers overarchingly I think are in a much better place now that they're seeing that when they see these changes that are in place. But there may be some other things. One of the things that kind of came up, and this is one that I'm grappling with too, is I was asked about, okay, so I have an Apple Watch, you know, that's connected, so the notification, I mean, I think that this is Mary Ellen where you'd mentioned notifications need to be off, but let's say they're an athlete and they want to be able to track their steps or, do we not allow them to have an Apple Watch on? Or is it something that we have to add into the regulation saying, if during a test, you're not allowed to have your Apple Watch on, it needs to be put away. So I think there's like little things that we're going to have to keep tweaking as we go through this. But the nice thing about it being a regulation is we'll be able to actually get that feedback and be able to continually look at how do we actually make this better as we go along. Um,
Mhm.
but I
And
think,
just to comment on that, there are so many other things that can suit the needs of your testing how many steps you have to, that wouldn't have internet access as an Apple Watch has. Not the same interactive um, type of thing. So just going back 5 years, 10 years, what we used then, it's like that would be that would be okay. And then there is some new it's kind of like an Apple Watch, but it's not connected with the internet. It's just connected. I'm not really sure how this goes, but it's like Quiz. It's not Quizmo, but it's a little quirky name, and it only allows a kid to interact with their parents and maybe only texting. I'm not really sure what the
yeah,
name of that is, but the key is it doesn't have a general internet connection.
yeah. No, I hear what you're saying, definitely. I think the hard part about this is technology changes so quickly
Mm,
that to start naming devices, and of course, I just named it as an Apple Watch, but it could be any smartwatch. Our policy states that it's actually a personal device. And so that's why the policy can stay the way it is. And then what we need to do is figure out with regulations, how do we want to kind of manage that definition? Right now, this one's specifically focused on cell phones, that they're silenced and so forth. But we can once I it'd be easy enough to add in there anything that's connected to the cell phone would be considered the cell phone
Mhm.
too. That
Yeah.
those,
And this is it that's a strong point. Things are changing all the time. And what we want to do is help children focus, help them be safer, help them be fuller human. And as you were saying, the parents, the kids, everybody feels we have too much screen time.
Yes, definitely. And it's funny that's yeah, as we talked about, just veering for a little bit at the board retreat. I don't know if you remember me mentioning that for one of our goals this year is really around the use of responsible use of technology. That's really one of my main goals, as well as parent, being able to have more parent outreach. And I think that if we can get ahead of that with AI and we can get ahead of that with some of the other components that we're looking at for our digital learning, it's going to be key. So you'll hear more about that as the year goes on, and ideally more opportunities for parents to get involved. This survey was a good example of
Very
what.
good example. Mhm.
So, which was great. So let me get into just kind of sharing our document, and I'm guessing, can you guys see my screen right now?
Yes.
Okay. So this was the original regulation that we had brought up, and I'm going to kind of walk through it quickly. We started off with purpose and guiding principles. Um, and we discussed that as obviously we wanted clear expectations for using cell phones. We wanted to produce a healthy learning environment. Okay, Marilyn, just like you were just saying, respecting the needs for connectivity and digital literacy. Okay, but respecting the needs, but also knowing that there's got to be a balance. These regulations applied to before we had it listed as that there was going to be a change between 9, 12, and K8. So now it's just saying all students. Okay. And this aligns with the policy, which talks about private technology devices by students. So regulations for the use of these devices. So general use guidelines. This used to say K8, and then there was grades 9 and 12 down here. So you can see that this is all redlined out so that we could actually then include what we needed to include in just one statement. Students can bring their phone to school, but they can only use them before and after school.
Felt
During the school day, phones must remain turned off and stored in student backpacks or other designated areas. Students may not use phones during passing periods, lunch, or recess. Exceptions may be made for emergencies or specific educational activities with teacher permission. Once again, actually, that was supposed to be out. So it's just emergencies. So you'll see in the final version that should have been redlined too, where it says or on. We did have changes that we had for 912, which were that they could use them during study halls and stuff. That's been redlined out already. And Mary Ellen, what you'd mentioned, earlier, this is where we kind of put in during instructional time, and really, I guess it's during any time, since it's both. Personal devices must be silenced and stored away. They cannot be out. We did have something in there originally that talked about teachers being able to implement specific phone policies. We've removed that. It's one consistent policy, one consistent message to everybody. For student and safety, the district recognizes that having these, sometimes sends a sense of security to not only students but the parents, but it's got to be balanced. So the classroom expectations for this. Once again, we did have a 912 separate from K8. We just removed those red lines right there. Phones must be stored away and should not be visible or used during instructional time, lunch, or transitions, period. I think that's the clearest message that we can kind of give.
Ralph,
Yes.
how are they gonna deal with the phones during lunch? Like, will the students have the phones?
Well, I mean, I think let's take it from a K level. They're going to be in lockers or away, so that's not.
Right.
But
I'm thinking high school.
in the case of the high schools, they're supposed to be done just the same way as anywhere else. They're supposed to be away. It's no different than any other item that if there's a rule, the students need to really be able to follow that rule.
But how will they be? They'll be monitored in that, do you think?
Right, who's gonna follow up on that?
Well, I think it's monitored the same way that we monitor lunch, but I can get more. That may be something that once again, if we can get some more clarification, if you want me to, I can get some more clarification on how the schools want to be able to manage that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We can definitely get some more clarification and add some more language into it for that. And that would then probably change classroom expectations to just regular school expectations should be the title of that section. We wanted to make sure that whatever's being done is consistent for staff. And I think that this one right here, schools must apply phone policies fairly to both students and staff, ensuring consistency across classrooms. I think when this was read originally, and it was Mary that had talked to me about this, the intention of this was not to say that a staff can't have their phone. I mean, that's not the issue. But there should be, once again, any policies that we follow, we should follow for everybody. It doesn't mean that their phones are put away. They're adults. They're supposed to be able to have them, but there's got to be some consistency across all places, and staff should be following that, meaning that they should be following the same procedure for all students to have that consistency. Does that make sense for?
Mm-hmm.
The enforcement should be clear communication and reminders and age appropriate interventions for noncompliance. We have discipline processes already in schools at different levels. They should be following those. It should be no different. Sometimes the example that I could use that may make the most sense with this is when we talked about originally when we started going to a one-to-one program and we had computer damage, the everybody was asking me at one point, well, how do you manage if a student breaks something on a computer? I'm like, well, the question I would go back to the school with is how do you manage it when a student breaks or there's damage done from negligence to a piece of property in the school, like a book or a chair? How do you manage that? You have procedures in place. We should follow those same procedures for a computer. It's no different. It just may be that if they have to pay for a portion of it or to replace it, it's the same thing. And that's what we actually do is we follow those consistent processes. I think that that's key with this is we want to make sure that we also, once again, if there's, the way that this should read is that if there's a process in lunch that you're expected to be able to follow certain rules, you need to follow those rules. But like I said, I think we can actually see if we can kind of clarify it a little bit more what that rule is and how that looks in the school expectations section. Accountability and consequences. This really didn't pretty much change. If it disrupts learning, violates school policies, you lose your privileges, or there's other disciplinary actions. So that's just based on our current, regulations that we have already in place. And that if phone use happens, There should be progressive interventions, which is what we normally do anyways with any type of discipline procedure. Warnings potentially leading to parent notification, confiscation until the end of the school day, or it's not being allowed to take out. So those are just some examples of how that would be approached depending on the procedures in each school. Um, when it comes down to the misuse of any type of technology for cyberbullying, harassment, unauthorized recordings, or prohibitive activities, it's disciplinary action aligned with the district's code of conduct. So that's already kind of listed in there. So it's pretty clear. Cyberbullying is no different than bullying.
In that paragraph, Ralph,
Yes.
where it says, or it being not allowed to be taken out at all the next day, isn't that won't be allowed anyway? Because they're only doing before and after.
No, the next day. Yes. Yes. Thank you. Yeah, grammatically that doesn't make sense because it's not in alignment. I hear what you're saying. Thanks. We'll make that change. There was a lot of talk about professional development for students and just the ability to learn a little more. So we want to make sure that we have digital literacy awareness. Schools will provide education on responsible phone use and social media use. And we do this right now in our digital citizenship curriculum. So we'll make sure that we continually update that and so that we can continue to do what we do. But it does need to be updated on a regular annual basis. I know some of my coaches are actually right now at the K-8 level working on developing some more AI lessons that they could integrate in there and take out lessons that may be a little bit dated at this point. I removed the whole section on positive use of technology.
Mhm.
Just didn't it like I said, it wouldn't make sense. It didn't flow anymore. Um, Okay. For the most part, for the review and the implementation of this, school administrators will do their consistent implementation of these regulations. So they do need to know that the same way that they do any type of discipline, that they've got the flexibility to do what's appropriate in their own building to be able to manage this. We should do an annual review. Like we should come back and just say, how is this working? I've already kind of gotten like an immediate, from even, well, I'll say Brian McMahon, that they've said it's like, yeah, this is we're seeing a change already. So how do we actually start to monitor that? And we should do that on an annual basis because the technology is going to change too. And similar to what, I mentioned about that district in Florida that tried to implement the yonder pouches annually now looking back, it probably, they're not implementing it again. They're making changes in the way that they're going to be able to kind of put things in place. They didn't really have any answers yet, but at least we know that they're thinking about it. We want to be able to have that same kind of a process. And so we will make sure that, over this year, that students are understanding what these rules are, that they get added to things like our student handbook. And we've already, like I said, added it to our digital literacy programs, but we'll continue to make sure that we update those on a regular basis. I removed the conclusion that was there that we originally started with. I think it's been pretty self-evident
Mhm. Exactly.
because it's more redundancy. And then the final version is right here that actually has the non-red line pieces so that you can take we don't have to go. I mean, it's literally what we just looked at. Um, and you'll see that one mention that I think I'd said about that should have been redlined has actually already been changed in the final version. Um, it's just a clean version that's a little bit easier for us to read. And with that that brings us to where we are now, which is that we've gotten a regulation that we've had a lot of feedback. I think we've tried to meet the needs of a variety of different groups. My suggestion at this point is that we work with the schools to make these couple of these 3 or 4 changes to the regulation. We start implementing it. and then we get feedback on whether or not it's working, if there's other things that we need to adjust. And that feedback should come from kids, should come from, like I said, the Center for Youth Leadership is a good example of, getting feedback once these things are in place. I've asked Bob Cassienda if, if it'd be okay for me to talk to the kids if he'd like, or however you'd like to kind of approach it to get more feedback from them. Um, and we can look at other student groups as well. I think we need to get more feedback from the teachers as time goes on. As they start implementing this, what are some of the things that they're running into that potentially can be tweaked, and administrators. And then finally, going back to the parents a little bit later this year to say, is this working? Do you see a change? It's like any suggestions that you may have for us moving forward. But I think that, I'm actually happy to say that I think that this is one regulation where we truly have tried to hit every stakeholder to get feedback to try and come up with something that makes sense to move forward, and that we can then go from here because we can still iterate. But I think for the most part, it's pretty well baked.
Uh, are there any other schools besides McMahon, like an elementary school that's already initiated something like this?
Well, we've actually had these procedures in place pretty much in almost every one of our K-8 schools.
So no cell phones in the classroom.
Yeah, no, they've been following that already. So I mean, it's been now we're just kind of putting it on paper so that they actually have a consistent practice they can refer back to.
And you're saying we've done that this year and last year?
I think, and most of our schools have actually done it for quite a few years. I think some of them, though, now are taking it to the next level of, especially at the high schools. I think that's where you weren't seeing during passing time. There wasn't like there was always regulations that teachers were having with cell phones, but in some cases we had started off a number of years ago when cell phones were really becoming predominant in schools. Excuse me, of looking at things like saying, as a teacher, you have a choice. You can, we would use those pouches as an example. A lot of this was done, Norwalk High did quite a bit of this. I think McMahon did as well. And, you could have a day where teachers decided all phones go in the pouch. You're not allowed to use them. Another day where a teacher could decide to say, it's like, you do need them for this period and for the, you can use them, or you can ask to go and get your phone if you want to. So we kind of let them have that flexibility. But part of it is, and even the kids came back, when we were looking into saying, it's like, yeah, the rules is this way in one room and not the same in the other room. So it was actually confusing to them too. And they, they're kids. So having that consistency was one of the things that resounded through all of this. Teachers, parents, students too. Once again, I think their consistency, they still wanted probably at the high schools to have like the passing time and lunch. But beyond that, though, they did want consistency. They wanted to know that everybody's following the same rules, so it's easier for them to kind of, stick to that standard.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you for all the work. I think it's important for the public to know that, this isn't written in stone. It's always a work in progress. I know that we got a lot of emails stating, that they were worried about what it looked like previously. And, you spoke with most of them and you explained to them that it was a work in progress and that the survey was out and we're taking in, like you said, all stakeholders, everybody that had something to share or concerns.
Yeah, I did have a conversation with one of our parent groups,
Mhm.
and because of the concerns that they had, and once I shared with them these changes, like, and I actually shared with them, I just explained to them a little bit of the bullet points that we went through in the PowerPoint that you just saw a few minutes ago, and the feedback immediately was, oh, okay. I think they were under the impression that like I said, the hard part about this, and I think sometimes the way it's almost, it's difficult sometimes to communicate this, but the way that we've been approaching policy for the last year, it's an iterative process. It doesn't happen in just one meeting. And, what we're trying to do is make it so that it is as transparent as possible, that people are seeing that these changes are going on and that we can still adjust. So that's, I think, something that once they saw that and they said, well, yeah, I said, they were asking me, it's like, you didn't get any parent feedback yet. Well, I couldn't get the parent feedback till I had this survey to give you to get the parent feedback and that you guys were back in school session so you could give us feedback. And once that person saw the feedback, they're like, oh, okay, well, that kind of makes sense. So I think it's sometimes maybe it's, and this is something that I can own a little bit too, is how do we actually message that this is just a constant, going back and forth and having these conversations. When we implemented the model policies that first year, a lot of it was pretty cut and dry. There were just certain things that just had to happen. Now that we're getting into that a process that those simple model policies, like the one that you passed last night at the board meeting, that was brought down from the state on school climate. That is something we had to do. And if we left the bullying policy in place, it actually would have conflicted. So our attorneys told us you actually need to remove it because everything in your bullying policy is already in the school climate policy. You're creating almost like a contradiction, you know. So sometimes things are cut and dry, but stuff like this is stuff that we want to continue to have those conversations and why it's so important that it's a regulation because that allows us to be able to kind of continually iterate and put things in place and make these changes. We'll then follow up with the schools to make sure that they understand what those changes are, just similar to the way that I showed them that these are the changes that we're looking at to share with your staff. And, this is with the principals the other night. Um, and then, like I said, if there's questions that come up, we can always re-add this to the agenda and then just continually see if there's any big changes. I mean, these couple of changes that we talked about here, I think are reasonable that they're easy enough to change and I can just share as an, almost like an FYI. And the regulations are something that are actually approved by, you don't have to vote on them. It's not like a policy change. So, we can start the implementation pretty quickly and then start to get feedback. And that would be my suggestion.
Mm. Ralph, could you just talk for a moment about the communication aspect of this? Do you once the regulation is in its out of the draft form into a regulation, is that then given to the principals and the
Yeah.
principals give it to the teachers? Just talk how that line of communication
Yeah. So
flows.
the process to really go through this is to be able to then give it to the administration because as the leaders in the building, they need to be able to, especially in this case, there has to be a consistency for them to be able to implement this. So the feedback would be now going back to our principals, and I had asked them when I had sent this out, I had asked them for some comments, and one of the comments that came back was specifically around the smartphone. That was one of the items that had been brought up by the. So they're already thinking through this, how they want to implement this in their schools. So the next step would be, here's a regulation. Do what you normally do in your buildings as a building leader to be able to move it forward. Talk to your staff and reach out to me with any questions so that I can actually help support that. And then if there's things that need to come back, we do that. I once again, like I said, I know that usually with something like this, I think it's important that we kind of get it out there. We're actually pretty much following these rules already. So I mean, a lot of these things are in place. So it's not going to be a bigger lift than some of us think. It's just going to be more consistent, and I think it'll actually allow the teachers to know that they've got the support that they need. I'll be reaching out to not only usually in this case, I would reach out to the principals, but then I would reach out to people like Mary and so forth. It's like, what do you think? You know, does this make sense? Is there any other comments that you want to be able to, think through and stuff? And we haven't had a lot of policies like this, excuse me, regulations that we've had to do up to now. But now that we're actually getting into the nitty-gritty of this, and we're beyond the model policy stage, I think this will happen more often. But it's a feedback loop that we have. But it starts with the building leader, and from there, they really are the ones that should deliver the message to their staff, to their community. If they need help with templating, like if they want a consistent message, we can sometimes just the same thing that we did in the past when there's damage to computers, the thing that I mentioned earlier. I would template out each year if principals would like to use it, an example of what they can send home as a parent letter about and then they can tweak it, knowing that these are the prices for a screen, this is the prices for this is the price for that if there's damage. So, like I said, that's usually the process. It starts with the building leaders. We let them, take that and implement it in their schools.
So then, as a regulation, we do not need to move it to the full board for voting. It's because the policy has not changed. Okay.
Yeah.
So do we need a second read, or are we both comfortable with, all three of us comfortable with as is? And give it a shot and see how it's working and then circle back at a specific timeline?
Yep. And I think the one thing that I need to add in there, as Janine had mentioned, because we did show that the notifications to be turned off and silenced, that, the difference that you just saw in the final version. I do need to ask the schools how they want to be able to manage lunch and phones, and if there's another bullet that we can add in there to be able to help make that clarification a little bit better for the expectations around that especially for the high schools.
Mhm.
But I think beyond that, then there's another thing that the grammatical piece about taking it out the next day for the option that I'll make a change to that sentence so that it reads correctly.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
You.
Thanks, Ralph.
All
Thank
right. Well, that was very informative. Thank you for all the work as usual. At this moment, I have a motion to adjourn. Mary Ellen, seconded by Janine. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care.